back to the show, and we have the pleasure of having Paul Hellyer joining us here at the table. Paul, who was a former defense minister under the Lester Pearson, Paul, right? And you know, I was just thinking about it this morning, and I kind of mentioned it to you before, but you were actually the first politician I ever supported in my life, because I remember the Liberal Convention of 1968, and me and my dad were watching it, and he was supporting you, and so therefore so was I. So it just occurred to me this morning, you're the first politician.
May I congratulate you and thank you.
Being on the right side of the issues ever since. So now we're talking about, you've been a lifelong passionate about macroeconomic issues. That's why you got into politics in the first place.
Correct.
So so let's get right into it, because we got a lot of ground to cover here. But you claim that the current recession could be ended with the stroke of a pen. I mean, it sounds like a miracle, but maybe you can explain that to people.
Well, it is a miracle, or would be a miracle, but I believe in miracles, or I wouldn't get out of bed in the morning. So it is as easy, really, as a stroke of a pen. And the federal government actually has the power to end the recession anytime it wants to.
Okay.
All it needs is the political will and the understanding of what they're doing and how they should do it. And as you know, the Constitution of Canada gives the federal government and Parliament, because it's important, Parliament really has the power, theoretically, to over all matters relating to money and banking. And consequently, they could create all the money that they wanted or that they needed, or they could continue to let the private banks create nearly all of it, and then have to go cup in hand and borrow from the banks when they run short and pay it back with interest, which is one of the silliest things I've ever heard, because they own the patent, and the banks have no rights. All they have are licenses, and yet they're making all the money. And whoever creates the money makes the profit. So what's happened over the years is that the government has given up its profit and passed it over to the banks, which doesn't make a lot of sense for taxpayers.
Because all that interest, which is now going to private banks, could have gone back to the people of Canada through the Bank of Canada.
Absolutely.
Now, okay.
Wow.
See, I already know this stuff, Sandra, but I know it's new to you and maybe to some of the
total newbie at
viewers out there. So this is great. So we have a great test case right here. But I mean, if it's as simple as you say, you go ahead, Sandra. I mean, why hasn't it been done before?
Why wasn't it done? I think because they don't understand it. When I wrote my first book on this subject about 15 years ago, and interestingly enough, it was called Funny Money. So I interviewed about 100 people, doctors, lawyers, dentists, business people, the chief executive editor of one of Canada's biggest newspapers, one of its most important, they think, and the publisher of one or two others, and some financial writers, and said, tell me where money comes from. And first of all, they were gun shy of the question. And I say, come on now, it's not going to bite you. And so then they said, well, the government prints it. And I said, well, how much does the government print? And they said their estimates were from 60% to 100%. Not one of them guessed at less than 60%. And of course, if we had that kind of system, it would be very, very different. We wouldn't have a recession today. But in fact, about 90% of all the new money created every year is created by the private banks, and this is something that the people who are running the country didn't understand. And the reason I felt that I had to write a book and to keep on trying to educate them, so that they would know that whoever creates the money makes the profit, and they have turned that function almost totally over to a group of very wealthy, powerful private individuals at the expense of the taxpayers, of the people. And this isn't right, and we've got to do something about it.
Wow. Okay, so if the privately owned banks create the money, or most of it, where do they get the money that they lend?
Oh, this is the answer you'll love. They create it out of thin air. Would you believe? They have practically no money in their, they have now, after some changes in the Bank Act in 1991, they don't have to have cash reserves against their deposits. So they probably only have a cent or a cent and a half in cash or legal tender for every dollar you think you have in the bank. But what they do, and a lot of people keep telling me, well, if you go in for a loan, that they lend you the money that I or somebody else deposited yesterday or the day before. Well, that's not true. They're lent out all the time. So if you went in for a loan, let's say you wanted to borrow $35,000 for a new car, and you see your friendly banker and tell them what you wanted. They say, well, what collateral do you have? Some stocks or bonds? Well, if not, how about a second mortgage on your house or cottage?
Okay.
Or failing that, get Hugh or someone else, a friend or relative as a co-signer, and then they're satisfied.
Okay.
And they'll say, okay, here's a note to sign.
Okay.
And they give you a note to sign for $35,000,
Okay.
principal plus interest,
Okay.
at prime plus 1 or 2% or 3%, depending on, I sometimes think, the color of your eyes. And then as soon as they're satisfied with the collateral and they have their note signed, they tap their computer, and presto, $35,000 shows up in your account that you can go out and spend to buy the car. Seconds earlier, that money did not exist.
It's just a number.
It's virtual money.
Okay.
Actually, it's virtual money.
Okay.
It's debt money. We count it as money. It works as money. So
it's not real money.
It's not real money, no. But the way the system works, as far as the banks are concerned, it's sort of a double accounting.
Okay.
They use your note as an asset, and the money they created is a liability. So this balances their books.
Okay, so they're taking my real money because as collateral,
Well,
and they're giving me fake money.
Well, you didn't give them any real money. You just gave them a promise to pay,
Okay.
and then that's what they gave you back.
But if I can't pay it, then they can take my real collateral.
Property.
They will
Absolutely.
grab your
And they never gave me real stuff to begin with.
no. But if you don't pay it back with interest, they'll take your car.
Now that sounds like a scam to me.
That sounds like a total scam.
Yeah.
It should be illegal.
And it should be. And
Well-
this has been going on for how long?
A few hundred years,
Wow.
and it is a scam, and
Wow. It's a really well hidden scam. At least I know lotteries are scams, right? It's right in your face.
This is something we should talk about, is how the scam came into being.
Well, look, we can do that. It just seems that people, it strikes people when they hear this as impossible or just new information. And it seems as if maybe we're just not properly educated about how the system works.
Yeah.
No,
And that's part of the problem.
That is the problem.
Yeah.
Because from what I found and my experience when I wrote the book, I would guess that about one person in every 100 understands how it works. And I've never seen a parliament with more than 5 or 6 people who knew how it worked.
Wow.
And since my being there, not one in the cabinet that I know of. So anyway, let's go back to the time when the Bank of England was chartered. And King William of Orange, was fighting a war on the continent. He ran out of money. So somebody said, well, why don't you have a bank? Sounded like a good idea, so Parliament approved the charter for the Bank of England, and the rich people in London put in £1,200,000 of gold and silver and lent it all to the king at 8%. Pretty high interest rate for government guaranteed loan. Then they charge a few little other things in the process, just like they do today. And then to show his appreciation, the king said, now you can print, print, £1,200,000 in banknotes and lend them to your rich friends. So in effect, they were given the right to lend the same money to 2 people, the king and the friends, at the same time, and collect interest from both.
Okay.
Well, over the years, that ratio, which we call leverage, that was a leverage of 2 to 1. And let's call it a minor, a minor misdemeanor,
okay,
sort of a small fraud kind of thing. But over the years, that's grown much more generous due to the avarice of the banks and the collusion or cooperation of politicians, including kings and queens and emperors over the years. And in the early years of the 20th century, the American federal banks had to have a gold reserve of 25%, which means they could lend the same money 4 times. When I was young, in Canada, the banks had to have a cash reserve of 8%, which means they could lend the same money 12.5 times. Well, then after our government changed the Bank Act in 1991, along the lines of Milton Friedman, and adopted the new idea of capital reserve, our banks were allowed to have assets 20 times their capital. So in effect, they could lend the same money to 20 different people, businesses, or governments, and collect interest from every one of the 20 simultaneously.
Wow.
Now that is what I call grand larceny.
Wow.
That is just...
That's a huge scam.
That's a major fraud. And it's just a wonder that they haven't been called on it long ago. But the reason really is, which we can discuss, that they're running the world now, and they make it very difficult for people who try to change the system.
Like yourself.
Yeah.
So it is really that's evidence that we've gone from a 2 to 1 ratio to a 20 to 1
yes.
ratio, which means that the scam has increased tenfold from the first Bank of England.
Right.
Now, and this is money as debt. This is all the money that's created as debt.
Well, you just put your finger on the other problem. In addition to being a fraud, there is a real problem when most of the money is created by the banks, because it's all debt money. It's all virtual money.
So that's what debt money means, right, Paul? It's fake. It's not real.
Well, it sometimes works as money, but it's not real money.
Okay.
It's not like a $10 bill or a $20 bill or...
Can't hold it in your hand.
No.
Well,
okay.
Plus the other thing is, because it's all created as a debt, now interest is owed on it.
Oh, sure.
And where is that interest supposed to come from?
Well, absolutely. And this is... It's a system. It's just like a balloon. And the banks keep pumping in this debt money, and the balloon gets getting bigger and bigger and bigger. It's like a bubble, some people call it. The balloon gets bigger until finally the debt load is so high, or the interest on the debt is so high, that we can't carry it. And then it's like a balloon with a pin stuck in it. And it goes swish like that, and you have a recession. And that's when people lose their jobs and their houses and all of this sort of thing.
And now this is what's happening in the U.S. with the fiscal cliff and the whatever they call that, where they have to mandatorily stop federal government expenditures. This is that balloon has hit its maximum size.
Absolutely, the balloon burst because it got too big. And this has happened 25 times or more in the United States since 1890 rather, pardon me.
25 times?
25 recessions and depressions, and in my opinion, not one of them was necessary. And yet they have disrupted the lives of millions and millions of people.
Their real lives, not their fake money lives.
Yeah, exactly.
And now we talk about a global financial crisis, and so many countries. We hear about Greece, we hear about Portugal, the U.S., and we have our own problems here in Canada. Now, but these problems didn't always exist. I mean, we did very well during and after the Second World War here in
Absolutely,
Canada.
And Canada started out beautifully. We nationalized the Bank of Canada in 1938 due to the advice of Jerry de Geer, who was the icon of monetary reformers. And Mackenzie King, he convinced him that if a government that doesn't control its credit isn't a democracy, doesn't have control, and that's
makes sense to me.
No, that's exactly the truth. So they nationalized the bank in 1938, and it didn't do much the first year, but then the war came along, and it came out of hibernation and really sprang into action and started creating very, very large sums of money for the government of Canada at near zero cost. I don't know if it's necessary to explain how that happened or not, but their net cost was near zero. It was just the cost of administration deducted.
Well, I'm just thinking about before the Second World War, the Depression was on, and there was very high unemployment. There were no jobs in the country.
Right.
And then we went from, all of a sudden, through the war, through the use of this policy and the Bank of Canada, to completely reinventing and industrializing the whole country.
Absolutely. From nothing happening to everything happening, we hit a historic low of 1% unemployment.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
And think about that, because I don't know what our stated unemployment rate is today, but there are so many people that would love to have jobs that just can't find them these days.
Worse, 1 million young people between age 15 and 25 without jobs. That's awful. Yeah. That's terrible.
Yes.
And that's the reason we've got to do something about it. But it's interesting, if they had done what our group is recommending in 1930, there would have been no Great Depression.
Exactly. And maybe no need for a war.
Well, hopefully, yes.
Yeah. So now things have turned bad, obviously, from all that growth during and after the war to where we are today. Something happened.
Well, we had this same system after the war. It got us out of the Depression through the war. And after the war, it helped finance the St. Lawrence Seaway and the Trans-Canada Highway and the great new airport terminals that we built. And in addition to that, help us lay the foundation for our Medicare and our Social Security systems, which were the envy of the world. And things were going swimmingly until 1974. And in 1974, the rules were changed, and it's been downhill ever since. Because in 1974, there was very little unemployment. A little bit, but not much. There was not one food bank in Canada.
Wow.
And today there are almost 2,000.
Wow.
Tuition fees were reasonable. Our Medicare system was well funded. That was the situation in '74. So the Bank of Canada adopted new rules. It bypassed our needs and started taking its orders from the Bank for International Settlements in Zurich, Switzerland.
That happened in 1974?
Yeah.
Okay.
And we became a member of a committee over there that sets the rules for the world. And I guess we went to our heads. And so we adopted two decisions that the Bank for International Settlements made. First, to adopt the ideas of Milton Friedman, which was basically a deregulated system. And he was interesting because he went from someone who recommended 100% cash reserves nearly all of his life to someone who went for zero cash reserves. Wow. You have to wonder about the judgment of someone
that's pretty extreme.
Who jumps from 100 to zero. Anyway, that was the first decision that they made. And the second one was to stop providing cheap money to governments. And that is when everything started going downhill. Well, then the third thing they did was they decided that they were in charge of controlling inflation. So Paul Volcker, the chairman of the Federal Reserve System, the U.S., decided in 1980-81 to put monetarism, Friedmanism, to the ultimate test. He raised interest rates to 18 or 20% and came within about, I think it was 5 hours of destroying the whole world financial system. In Canada, not to be outdone, we put ours up to 22%. And it just slows everything down.
Wow. The
economy crashed. I think we lost almost 700,000 jobs. People who were working before wiped out. And people lost their houses and their businesses and their farms, sometimes after 4 or 5 generations in the family. And it was just dreadful. But then those are the social consequences. The economic consequences were that people who are unemployed don't pay taxes. And the government still has to see that they don't starve, which means there are higher costs. So you have a deficit, a huge deficit.
Okay.
And then you roll that over into debt. And with interest rates at those levels, the debt doubles every 4 years. And that was the beginning. Until then, we had had a stable debt to GDP ratio for about 35 years, and it just started taking off like an airplane going up, towards the mountains. And we've never really recovered from it. We started to recover a little bit, and then John Crow, our new governor of the bank, in 1990, decided to do it to us all over again. And we have never recovered from these two terrible, dreadful recessions, which were deliberately brought on by the government of Canada and created all of the debt that we have today. And Ellen Brown, who is a member of our international group trying to change the system, was talking one day, and she said, "Paul, do you know how much interest the Canadian people have paid on the debt that was created unnecessarily?" And I said, "No." She said, $1 trillion. I said, "Ellen, I love you dearly, but I think you're putting me on." So I sent a missive to the Parliamentary Research Group, and one of the few benefits of being a Privy Councillor is you have access to their research group, and asked how much interest did the Canadian people pay on the federal government debt from 74-75 to 2010-11. The answer, $1,100 billion.
Wow.
Can you imagine what we could do with that much money?
Wow.
And that's money that we didn't have to pay. And now the Canadian taxpayers are being increasingly heavily asked to pay that money.
We still pay it.
Yeah.
And it works out if you divide it out. I took an average workforce for of those years. It's just a ballpark thing, not terribly accurate, but close enough. I think it cost every person in the labor force about $87,000 if they worked those 37 years.
And I'm just thinking, everybody that's watching this, anybody that owes money as a student loan, or anybody that wishes they were making more money, or anybody that can't find a job and wishes they could, these are people that are all being affected by this policy decision. Every
single one of them, every single person. Doesn't matter if they're First Nations needing more money for health care or for housing, or students whose tuition is so high that they have to go deeply in debt and never get out of it, for a long time. Everybody is affected. Every single person in the whole country is affected. Okay. And that's the reason we have to have a new system.
All right. Well, it's almost like, we've talked about the global financial problems, the meltdown of 2007. It seems like we're still teetering on the brink of some kind of global financial
disaster,
collapse.
Yeah.
And we are teetering on the brink, and worse than that, we're not really growing.
Yeah.
We're not growing fast enough to employ the young people that I was talking about. And
there's big social consequences to that too. That is a whole other interview.
Well, sure. In Europe, people marching in the streets. In England, everywhere, it's a very precarious situation, and it's getting so long now. It's almost the length of the Great Depression, and will, unless we do something. It will probably exceed in length the Great Depression if we don't act right away.
Wow.
And just think about people's lives, how they're affected, and how the suffering of people who just don't have enough money to pay those bills every month, and how there's more and more of those people every day, and the homeless people on the street. The problem we didn't have 30, 40 years ago?
Positively.
Okay, Paul. Now, you got a solution to this.
That's right.
And we want to hear.
I've been working on it.
Let's have some good news, because this is pretty depressing.
Yeah, well, I've written 13 books, and I've never written a book complaining about the situation without providing a solution. Don't say that they're all perfect, but I really sort of dislike people saying, well, the world's going all to you-know-what, and then say there's no way out of it.
Yeah.
Because there's got to be a way out, and there is a way out. And what it really is adopting a variation of what we did from 39 to 74.
Okay.
And we know it works because it worked then. So what we're proposing, and this is a group of people who have been studying this problem, is that we would ask the federal government to have what we call a new social contract between the government of Canada and the people of Canada, and that it would involve changing the system and going back to what we had in that period, which was really sharing the money creation function between the Government of Canada and the private banks. That's what they did for those years until 74. So go back to that system of sharing. But first of all, we would prime the pump and get the economy up and running and provide jobs for people. So part of the solution is to have the Government of Canada immediately print 15 $10 billion share certificates in Canada.
Okay.
Non-redeemable, non-transferable, and check with the Department of Justice to see if they would qualify as collateral for the Bank of Canada to issue new money.
Okay.
And if yes, okay, and if no, change the Bank of Canada Act. And then to order the Bank of Canada to take the shares and create $150 billion and deposit it in the Government of Canada's bank accounts.
Okay.
On the understanding that it would be split 50-50 between the Government of Canada and the provinces and territories on a per capita basis.
Okay.
And also with the understanding that the provinces and territories would come to the relief of the hard-pressed municipalities, like Toronto, for example, which has so many things to do and so little money to do it.
Build a subway.
Well, that's for sure.
Just one example. We all know we need it.
Take down the Gardner.
Yeah.
Develop the port lines. You know, you can go on and on forever.
And put all those people to work
yes.
that would
Fix
love
the
to have
potholes.
jobs.
Right. And then there's another thing that has to be done simultaneously, and that is we have to reverse the decision that Parliament made in 1991 about cash reserves.
Yes.
And give the Minister of Finance the right to establish cash reserve requirements for the private banks, up to a maximum of 34%. And the reason for that is to prevent inflation. Because as soon as you open your mouth and talk about government-created money, people say, "Oh, it'd be wild inflation. It'd be roaring inflation." Not true. It is a myth, a total myth, because money is money, and it's the amount of money that's created, not who creates it, that makes the difference. But they have brainwashed just about everybody to believe that it would be like, you know, getting the Great Plague or something. So they have to have that. And then to repeat this process for 7 years, increasing the cash reserves 5% each year, and creating about $150 billion or $125 each year, until the banks then have 34% cash reserves. And after that, to split the money creation function, 34% with the Government of Canada and 66% with the banks. And that would work for everybody. The government would have enough to balance their budgets, federal, municipal, and provincial, and still provide all of the real needs of the people that we've been discussing, and without, well, actually they could lower taxes, and without any deficits. They could balance their budgets every year, no need for deficits. And then as soon as the system was up and running, they would have surplus cash for a while during those 7 years, which they could use to start paying down the existing debt. And by the end of the 7 years, the federal government should be able to pay down about 1/3 of its existing debt, which means lower taxes because less interest to be paid.
Right.
Now the bottom line is we know it works because it worked when we did it before.
So it's a proven model.
Yeah.
Wow.
Well, and you know, I think some kind of policy. I notice on the Bank of Canada website they have no mention of a full employment policy, which means that people are suffering and they're not able to pay their taxes even.
Yes, and it's not a factor when they're looking for a new governor either. They've forgotten their purpose. They came into being in 1935 at the insistence of the farmers of Western Canada and the unemployed people who were being let down by the banking system. So the idea was we'll have a central bank and that will get the banking system to somehow work for our benefit,
right,
at least to bail us out somehow. Well, it didn't work until the war came along. But then it worked, and it showed that it will work. And as I said, if it had been done in 1930, there wouldn't have been any Great Depression. And if it's done now, our long recession depression will end. If it's not done now, we're doomed for several more years of slow growth, and maybe, heaven only knows what, with Europe and the United States. The fact of it could be I don't want to over-dramatize, but I just came back from there, and there are people who don't deny the possibility of civil war again.
Wow.
And the stakes are just so terribly high. And there's one final thing that is driving me, and that is that the number one problem in the world is global warming. And it's on the back burner because nation states don't have enough cash to convert to clean energy in the time that absolutely has to be done. Clean energy exists. It has for at least 40 or 50 years. It's all hidden by the same people that run the banks and the oil companies. We call them a cabal. And they have this energy, but they're willing to see the world go to you-know-where because they want to cash all their chips from the oil investments. And we've got to somehow get rid of that power. And one of the big benefits that we haven't discussed is at the end of all this, their ratio, their leverage will be back down to 2 to 1. They will have no power to run the world, as they have been recently. We will restore democracy as we know it, government of, by, and for the people. And we will have then the power to do these other things, all of them, including, I would say, a transformation of every car, truck, tractor, airplane, and home to a little box of zero-point energy in 8 years, which would just be maybe fast enough to stop the global catastrophe from happening.
Okay, now Paul, it sounds like a good plan in terms of because we've used it before.
It's proven.
And you know, as a young person, I'll still include myself in that category, but.
We all do.
I know, but I mean,
all include him in that category.
I think it's easy for people to become discouraged by the state of where things are in their own personal financial situation. But you're convinced that this plan can work.
I have absolutely no doubt. I would stake my life on it, even if I were younger. And I know it will work, and I know that it is really. It's not the only solution, but it's the best one I've come across. And I know that if people do it, it will affect beneficially the lives of every man, woman, almost every man, woman, and child in the country.
So why would this be such a hard sell? It's a proven formula. So why wouldn't the government just go back to what works?
Well, if you read Ellen Brown's book, Web of Debt, about how they formed the Federal Reserve System in the United States, which is privately owned, the biggest heist in history. It's cost the American people $16 trillion. You'll see that at the end of all this machination, they bought the 25 biggest and most powerful papers in the United States so that they could decide what would be printed on this.
So what the public knows.
And I don't know. I suspect there's something similar going on today, that concentration of power in the press has been getting bigger and bigger and bigger.
Yep.
And if you trace the money back, you'll find that some of it will go right back to the cabal. And they pull strings, and they really do a lot of things, including brainwashing people. Federal Reserve System spent $380 million last year having studies done by economists, deans of economic schools, and so on. Do you think any of those people are going to go out and say that the Fed should be abolished? This year, I think it's going to be $400 million.
Well, when you have all the money in the world and you've got a rigged game like that.
Big stakes we're talking about.
Wow.
And there's a reason why Canada should do it first. And that is because we own our bank outright, unlike most of the central banks.
So that's our leverage.
That's our leverage. But it's our chance to lead. And because we have a government with majorities in both the House and the Senate, so they could enact this legislation we're talking about in 2 weeks or less.
Wow.
They could do it in 4 or 5 days if they really wanted to, if it was important to them. They could do it in 4 or 5 days just by getting the approval of the cooperation of the other parties, and I'm sure they wouldn't have any trouble getting it, because you can't look a gift horse in the face and say no, because this is something that it's nonpartisan. It cuts right across the board. It affects people regardless of the most right-wing conservative or the most left-wing socialist. It affects everybody, and everybody should get behind it. And we're going to ask people to go to our website, which we'll have soon, and to read all about it and send letters, not emails, but letters, to their MP, the Minister of Finance, and the Prime Minister, saying we like this new social contract, it's in our interests, and we want you to do it now.
So what you're proposing, it can't happen unless the people take a stand as well? So you need the people, is that what you're saying?
No, that's not what I'm saying.
Okay.
I'm saying the government could do it tomorrow.
Okay, but the government needs the power of the people
to push them. If I were the Prime Minister, the new budget would incorporate it.
Okay.
But strange as it may seem, I'm not the Prime Minister. It came fairly close once or twice.
Go figure.
And the present Prime Minister, I think, in a letter I put to him recently, his economics professors were as useless as mine were 60 years ago. And he got this crazy idea that somehow austerity is going to solve the problems. Never, ever.
Okay.
And he should have learned that. Okay. So they could do it.
Okay.
But what I'm saying is the cabal and the big guys have the power, but we have the numbers.
Okay.
And we have to get them out in the streets, and there are thousands, saying, this is what we want.
Okay.
And we want you to do it. And if you don't do it, we're going to use every peaceful means within our control to make it happen.
Okay,
Paul, we're just about out of time here, but we do need people, we have to work together on this. So what can people who are watching this right now do to take the first step towards helping make all this happen?
But we want to make it as easy for people as possible. And Paul Hellyer, web, all one word, .com.
Okay, Paul, that's
And the other one is victoryfortheworld.net.
All right. Okay, Paul.
And we will try and get this information about our website up on both of those within a week.
Wow, okay.
So that people will be able to
So we need people to actively participate for this to happen.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thousands of them.
Because it means more than just the sake of the global economy. It's everyone's personal financial situation that's at stake here.
Yeah.
Okay.
Wow. Taking the power back.
Thanks for doing this.
It was a pleasure. I love any chance to say what I think.
Well, we look forward to working with you to make this happen, and with everybody who's watching this is cooperation.
Yeah, absolutely.
So thanks for doing this.
And collaboration.
My thanks to you both.
Okay, Sandra.
Wow.
That's it. We're going to run some video now that's going to just kind of punctuate everything that Paul's been talking about here. So that's it for the show.
Awesome
we'll
show.
We'll be back next week.
Thank you. Thank you, Paul.
Meanwhile.
Thank you, Sandra.
Okay, so here's the video. That's it for the show. Thanks, everybody. We'll see you next week. Cheers.
Let's start off with money. Where does it even come from?
Where do I think it comes from? Like it's made? The government?
Money comes from paper.
I believe it comes from trees. In the long run, I think it comes from trees. No, I believe money. I'm not 100% sure.
That's a trick question. Why?
Well, that's actually an interesting question. First of all, money is prior to money. This is going to sound like a long answer, but I'm not quite sure I know the nature of your question. But let me see how I can handle it. Thank you. Prior to
It's actually simple. Over 95% of our money is created by private banks. That means there's less than 5% of government-created money. Let's look at the differences between creating the money ourselves and borrowing it from private banks. Creating the money ourselves pretty much just costs the labor to print it and the hard work to back it up, while borrowing money from private banks can cost up to 10 times or more than the principal before it's paid. This is Canada's federal debt. From 1867 to 1992, we owed $423 billion. However, 91% of this debt is the result of interest on interest, and only 8% of the money was actually used on real things, like goods and services. But now we have to pay back over 10 times what we needed, simply because we borrowed from private banks instead of ourselves. So where do these private banks get their billions of dollars from that they lend out? Nowhere! They just write down a number on a piece of paper and lend it out as if it was money to families trying to put a roof over their heads, students trying to get an education, or governments looking to improve the country. Banks then get paid multiple times back with your hard work. Every time they issue a loan, they are creating brand new money. It never existed before you walked into the bank.
So pretty much like you say, I go into a bank, I say, well, can I have like $10,000 to pay for my college? They say, sure, here, let me just go run this off the machine, and then you can pay us back with your hard-earned money.
Right. That's exactly it.
That's pretty crazy.
They just get you to believe that they're lending you what's inside their vaults. But it couldn't be further from the truth.
For instance, banks. Yeah, your banks have the amount of money that they have in reserve. The answer is no.
There's about $50 billion of real cash in Canada. All the private banks combined only have $4 billion in their vaults, or what they call reserves. And yet they've lent out $1.5 trillion, which they then charge interest on.
I think that the amount of money that's held in reserve in Canada, you're right, is pretty low. One of the reasons it's so low is because our banking system is as stable as it is.
Okay. So what would happen if we simply wanted our money back?
We would have a credit crisis, and the system would not be sustainable. So we'd have to reorganize and restructure, which is what happened actually in the Depression. I don't see that happening again.
Yeah.
But theoretically, that's what would happen.
Oh yeah, that sounds like a stable system. So isn't it a little bit fraudulent though if I were to walk into a bank and they give me a receipt I can redeem at any time, but it's only noticed that it would be called fraud if everyone came to the bank and requested their money?
Oh, I'm going to answer your question, but then I want to go back to mine.
Okay.
Because it really is. This is the huge change of the last 5 years. It's not fraudulent. It's not fraudulent. Because everybody understands it, but it is.
No one really understands it.
Well, okay. I mean, those who know about it, knew about it, so it was not fraudulent.
I've talked to the teachers and MPs, even MPPs, and they had no idea that there was only $4 billion in the vaults, but over $1 trillion was lent out.
Yeah, let me go back. Well, the fact that they didn't know it. They should have.
But really, no one does.
Well,
should that be involved a little bit more before we start using money? That we should be told where it is, where it comes from?
Well, no.
Okay, so it's one thing to lend out money you just don't have, but how can you charge interest on nothing, and not just any kind of interest?
Compounded interest.